Hello, welcome back and thank you for watching Betrayed Husbands Club. We appreciate each and every one of you. We'd like to know, what part of the world are you watching us from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Shadows of Home. Staff Sergeant Ryan, Jimmy, Callahan steadied his breathing as he peered through the scope of his M40A5 sniper rifle, the relentless Afghan heat pressing down on him. Beads of sweat rolled down his neck, but he remained motionless, eyes locked on the distant ridgeline, waiting for the slightest movement. Target spotted 2 clicks northeast. Navarro, his spotter, whispered. Armed tangos moving supplies. Jimmy adjusted his aim with practiced precision, his years of training kicking in like muscle memory. The familiar weight of his rifle against his shoulder was more than just steel and polymer. It was a trusted companion, one that had seen him through countless missions. Just as he prepared to engage, an unexpected buzz from his satellite phone cut through his focus. Hold position, he murmured to Navarro, reaching for the device. A voice message sat in his inbox. His son, Logan. That alone was unusual. Back home in Kentucky, it wasn't the time of day for calls. Keeping one eye on his sector, he pressed play. Dad? Logan's voice cracked, laced with fear. Ice shot through Jimmy's veins. The cartel. Mom's dating one of them. They've taken over the house, turned it into a drug lab. They said if you come back, they'll use me as a shield. Jimmy's grip on the rifle tightened. I told them you're a Marine sniper. Logan continued, his voice trembling. They just laughed. Now they've got me counting their money. The fire in Jimmy's chest burned hotter with every word. Logan's usual bright, energetic tone was gone, replaced by raw terror. His fingers clenched the phone so hard it nearly cracked. Sergeant? Navarro's voice cut in, noting the shift in Jimmy's demeanor. Everything okay? No. Jimmy's voice was granite. Nothing's okay. Memories flashed through his mind, Claire's distant behavior during their recent video calls, the way she dodged his questions about money, the vague mentions of new friends at work. It all clicked together in a sickening instant. Pack it up, he ordered, already moving. We're reporting back to base. The trek back was a blur of dust and determination. Every step fueled by anger, every breath laced with dread. Claire hadn't just betrayed him, she had put their son in the crosshairs of killers. At the forward operating base, Jimmy marched straight to Captain Leonard Vaughan's office, ignoring the questioning looks from his fellow Marines. Inside, Hayes sat at his desk, skimming through mission reports, the dim glow of a lamp casting shadows on his weathered face. Staff Sergeant Callahan, Hayes greeted, glancing up. What brings you in mid-patrol? Sir, requesting emergency leave, Jimmy stated, standing rigidly at attention. His voice was controlled, but the storm inside him was anything but. Family crisis back home. Hayes leaned back, eyes narrowing. Details, Callahan? Without a word, Jimmy played Logan's message. Hayes listened, his fingers drumming against the desk before going still. You know what you're stepping into? Hayes asked, his voice measured. This isn't some simple domestic issue. Yes, sir, Jimmy answered without hesitation. My son's in danger. Hayes studied him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. I've known you long enough to trust you'll handle this. But Callahan, he fixed him with a pointed look. Vendettas can make a man blind. Don't let anger control you. Jimmy's response was automatic. Understood, sir. But they both knew it wouldn't be that simple. There's something else, Hayes added, his voice lowering. Intel suggests cartel movements near your hometown. This could be connected. He tapped on his keyboard. I'll send what we've got to your secure email. Jimmy absorbed the new information, filing it away. Another layer to the hell waiting for him back home. Thank you, sir. As Jimmy turned to leave, Hayes called after him. And Callahan, whatever happens, I never heard that message. Back in his quarters, Jimmy packed with the efficiency of a man who'd done this 1,000 times before. Civilian clothes, basic tools, emergency cash. Every item had a purpose. His hands moved automatically, But his mind was elsewhere, flashing back to last summer. Fishing with Logan, the sound of their laughter rippling across the lake. Claire had been there too, but now, in hindsight, he remembered how often she checked her phone, how forced her smile had seemed. Had it already started then? Had she already been planning this? A knock at the door snapped him back. Navarro stood there, concern etched across his face. "Heard you're heading out," his spotter said. "Bad business back home?" "The worst," Jimmy muttered, stuffing the last of his gear into his bag. Navarro hesitated. "Need backup?" Jimmy paused. Navarro was a good man, loyal to the bone. But this? This was personal. "No. This is something I have to handle alone." Navarro studied him for a beat, then nodded. "Watch your six, Sergeant. Some enemies don't wear uniforms." Meanwhile, back in Kentucky, Emma O'Donnell sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stacks of cash Javier Morales counted with practiced precision. The cartel leader exuded a quiet menace, his tailored suit a stark contrast to their modest home. Family photos still adorned the walls. Jimmy in his dress blues. Logan at his school's science fair. Silent witnesses to how far she had fallen. "Your husband's on his way," Victor stated, not bothering to look up. It wasn't a question. Claire's fingers tightened around her coffee mug. "How do you know?" Victor finally glanced at her, his smile devoid of warmth. "Because men like him always come running when their family calls," he said smoothly. "Predictable. Useful." Her pulse quickened. "You promised no one would get hurt." Victor's expression softened, almost amused. "And no one will, mi amor, as long as everyone plays their part." He gestured toward the stairs. "How's our young accountant doing?" Upstairs, Logan sat cross-legged on his bed, surrounded by neatly stacked bundles of cash. His hands moved methodically, counting each pile twice, just like they'd instructed. On his desk lay his father's last letter from Afghanistan. The edges were worn, the folds on the paper weakening from how many times he had read it. At the door, one of Victor's men, Luis, leaned against the frame, idly cleaning his nails with a knife. "Faster, kid," he drawled. "Don't make me tell the boss you're slacking." Logan's hands trembled, but he didn't stop. He couldn't afford to. He learned to hide the fear. Logan had figured it out quickly. Fear only made things worse. Instead, he kept his focus on the numbers, on the rhythmic process of counting, forcing himself to think of it as just another task. A waiting game. Because his father would come. That was the one thing Logan knew with absolute certainty. Pieces moving into place. At the local police station, Detective Adrian Bishop leaned over his cluttered desk, flipping through a thick file on Javier Morales. His coffee sat untouched, long since gone cold. Pages of surveillance photos, reports, and redacted witness statements painted a damning picture of the cartel's growing grip on their quiet town. His phone vibrated, a text from an unlisted number. "Jimmy's coming home. We need to talk." Cole stared at the message for a moment before erasing it. A small smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. Maybe, finally, they had a real shot at taking Mendez down. Because Jimmy Callahan, Marine sniper, wasn't just coming home. He was coming home to war. Chapter 2, Coming Home to Chaos. The plane touched down at Louisville International Airport beneath a blistering Kentucky sun. Dressed in civilian clothes, Jimmy Callahan navigated the terminal with the same sharp awareness he carried in combat. His duffel was slung over his shoulder, his gaze scanning the crowd, every face analyzed, every glance scrutinized for hidden intent. On the flight over, he had pored over satellite images of his neighborhood, courtesy of Captain Hayes' intel. His home, once a place of peace, now examined through a different lens. The secluded cul-de-sac, the dense tree line in the back, once appreciated for privacy, now assessed for tactical advantage and infiltration routes. He wasn't heading home. Not yet. Instead, he drove a rented sedan to a storage facility on the outskirts of town. The unit, rented years ago under an alias, had been untouched. Inside, he found everything as he'd left it: surveillance gear, secure comms equipment, and a gun safe stocked with untraceable weapons. His phone buzzed. Detective Adrian Bishop. "You're back," Marcus said the moment Jimmy answered. "Word travels fast. In our business, it better." A pause. "We need to meet." "Not at the usual place." "The fishing spot." 1 hour. Old allies, new enemies. Jimmy arrived at the abandoned dock ahead of time, choosing a position that offered a full view of the surroundings. He leaned against the hood of his car, hands in his jacket pockets, watching. Right on schedule, Marcus' unmarked car rolled up, gravel crunching beneath the tires. The detective stepped out, adjusting his suit jacket, hiding his service weapon, as always. Time had added weight to his frame, but his eyes remained sharp. "You look like hell," Marcus observed. Jimmy didn't flinch. "Afghanistan does that." Marcus got straight to the point. "What do you want to know about Javier Morales?" Jimmy crossed his arms. "Everything." Marcus pulled out a thick manila envelope and handed it over. "Officially? He's a local businessman. Owns several legitimate properties, including the Redstone Bar. That's where Claire works." Jimmy's expression didn't change, but his grip on the envelope tightened. "Unofficially? He's running one of the most sophisticated cartel networks I've seen in 2 decades. Marcus sighed. "And we haven't moved on him because political protection." Jimmy finished for him. Marcus nodded, his disgust obvious. "Friends in high places. State level. Maybe higher. Any time we get close, the investigation gets buried." Jimmy flipped through the file, absorbing the layout of Mendez's operation. His crew? About 20 men in the inner circle. Ex-military, ex-law enforcement. They know what they're doing. Marcus hesitated before adding, "Your house is just one of their processing spots." Jimmy barely breathed. "Claire." Marcus hesitated again. "She's been with him for at least 6 months. Started as a bartender. Moved up to something more." Jimmy didn't move, didn't react. But the air around him seemed to shift. "And Logan?" Marcus exhaled. "They're keeping him close. Leverage against you. Against her." Jimmy's jaw clenched. "You've been watching my family." Marcus met his gaze evenly. "Someone had to." A pause. "I owed you. After what you did last year with the dirty cops." Jimmy exhaled slowly. He filed away the anger, the betrayal, the guilt, for now. "I need building schematics. Utility maps. Anything official on my house and the surrounding area." Marcus nodded. "Already in the envelope." He lowered his voice. "But listen, Jimmy. Whatever you're planning, be careful. These guys aren't street thugs. They're trained, disciplined. They will kill you." Jimmy's stare was cold, emotionless. "So will I." Hunting grounds. As Marcus drove off, Jimmy returned to his rental and studied the documents. His training kicked in. He mapped out entry points, structural weak spots, blind spots. The house, once a home, was now a tactical puzzle to be solved. For hours, he conducted silent surveillance from the woods behind his property, watching through high-powered binoculars. The guards worked in shifts. 2 at the front. 2 at the back. 4-hour rotations. They moved like professionals. Former military, Jimmy guessed. Maybe ex-law enforcement. Upstairs, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Logan. For a brief second, his son appeared in the window. Pale but steady. Then, slowly, deliberately, Logan pressed his hand to the glass in a distinct rhythm. Morse code. Safe. Waiting. Trust you. Jimmy's chest tightened. Smart boy. Logan hadn't forgotten their training. He hadn't lost faith. Now it was time to prove that faith was justified. A ghost on the line. As darkness crept over the treetops, Jimmy's phone vibrated again. Unknown number. But he already knew who it was. He answered. "Hello, Jimmy?" Javier Morales' voice was smooth, almost casual. The kind of voice that belonged to a man who always had the upper hand. Welcome home. Jimmy's grip tightened on the phone. If you've hurt my son. A soft chuckle. Please. We're all civilized men here. A beat. Then. Logan is safe. Quite the mathematician, actually. Very helpful with our accounting. Jimmy's free hand curled into a fist. Let me speak to him. Soon, Victor said lightly. First, we should talk. Man to man. Jimmy's jaw clenched. I have a business proposition for you. A proposal and a warning. Victor's voice remained smooth, almost amused. Your skills could be a great asset to my organization, Jimmy. Think about it, your experience, your precision. I could make it worth your while. Jimmy's silence was answer enough. No? Victor sighed. Ah, well. Perhaps Claire can be more persuasive. You remember how convincing she can be. A rustling sound. Then Claire's voice, shaky but desperate. Jimmy? Baby, please. It's not what you think. Victor's been good to us, Jimmy ended the call. His face was devoid of emotion as he watched another guard make his patrol pass below. Circles within circles. Back at the house, Victor set the phone down with a knowing smile. He hung up. He mused, almost amused. Predictable. Across the room, Claire wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the warm night air. He'll kill you, she whispered. Victor chuckled softly. Many have tried. He stepped closer, touching her cheek with a gentleness that sent a chill through her. Your husband is a soldier. He thinks in straight lines, direct action. I think in circles within circles. By the time he understands the real game, it will already be over. The predator in the dark. Upstairs, Logan lay still, his breathing steady, eyes shut, but he wasn't asleep. Just outside his door, Louis stood watch, shifting his weight every few minutes, exhaling softly, checking his phone when he thought no one was looking. Logan had studied all of it, just as he'd studied every other detail about the men holding him captive. Somewhere outside, his father was waiting. Watching. Logan remembered every hunting trip, every lesson. The deadliest predators are the ones you never see coming. Through his window, just beyond the tree line where he used to play, he could make out the faintest hint of movement. Jimmy Callahan was out there. Preparing for war. And when it came, Logan knew that no amount of Victor's money, men, or planning would be enough to stop it. Chapter 3: The First Strike. Nico Delgado adjusted his leather jacket as he stepped into the Pink Flamingo, the strip club's neon sign throwing garish pink and blue light across his face. The bouncer gave him a respectful nod. Everyone knew Rico worked for Javier Morales. No one wanted trouble with the cartel. Rico slid into his usual booth, ordered his usual drink, completely oblivious to the man watching him from the bar. Jimmy Callahan nursed a beer, expression unreadable, eyes locked onto his target. Rico was the weak link, young, arrogant, eager to prove himself. Perfect. Laying the trap. Rico barely noticed Jimmy until later, when he found himself at the bar next to him. You look like you've seen some action, Rico said, taking the bait. Jimmy let a small smirk touch his lips. Military. Former Force Recon. Rico's eyes lit up with interest. What do you do now? Freelance work. Specialty acquisitions, security. Whatever pays. Rico leaned in, eager now. Maybe we should talk business. My organization's always looking for talent. Jimmy let himself be drawn in at just the right pace. Competent but not cocky. Interested but not overeager. They moved to a quieter booth, Rico already loosened up from the alcohol and the excitement of recruiting someone valuable. Gotta be careful these days, Rico muttered, swirling his drink. Some Marine snipers been causing problems for us. Hitting our operations. Jimmy took a casual sip of his beer. Yeah? He any good? Must be. Took out 2 of our surveillance posts, clean. No traces. Rico leaned in conspiratorially. Between us? Boss is worried. Says this guy knows our routines. Been watching us. Sounds personal. Yeah, something about his kid. Rico caught himself, shaking his head. Anyway, not my business. Jimmy let the moment pass. He already had what he needed. Breaking the weak link. An hour later, Rico staggered into the alley behind the club, laughing drunkenly. Jimmy was right beside him, a steadying hand on his shoulder. You good, man? Let me call you a cab. Nah, Rico mumbled. Just need some air. He never saw the strike coming. Jimmy moved fast, efficient, nerve strikes paralyzing Rico's arms, pinning him against the wall before he could react. The laughter died in his throat. Jimmy's voice was ice. Tell me everything about Victor's operation. Rico's eyes went wide with sudden, dawning horror. You're him. Jimmy tightened his grip. Talk. Now. The information spilled out in gasping bursts. Guard schedules. Delivery routes. Safe houses. Jimmy committed every detail to memory, cross-checking it with what he'd already observed. When Rico ran out of useful intel, Jimmy delivered a precise blow, knocking him unconscious. He'd live. But the message was clear: cooperate, and you survive. Inside the cartel's stronghold. Back at the house, Claire paced the master bedroom, nerves frayed. Victor watched her from an armchair, calm, patient, amused. You're worried about Rico, he noted. Don't be. He's replaceable. Claire stopped. Jimmy won't stop. She turned to face him, her voice raw. You don't know him like I do. Victor stood unhurried. On the contrary, mi amor. I understand men like your husband perfectly. His dark eyes gleamed. They live by codes. Rules. That makes them predictable. A knock at the door interrupted him. Andres Vega, one of his lieutenants, entered with a tablet. Boss, Rico missed his check-in. Victor's expression darkened. Find him. The waiting game. In the basement, the lab buzzed with activity. Chemists worked methodically, processing and packaging, while armed guards maintained a constant presence. The operation had grown beyond its original scope. What had started as a small distribution hub had evolved into a major cartel facility. And the irony of running it out of a Marine sniper's house wasn't lost on anyone. Logan's role. Upstairs, Logan lay awake, listening to the sounds below. The shifts, the routines, the patrols. He had memorized them all. Some guards were cruel. Some were just following orders. But none of them were as careful as they thought. His father had taught him well. Observation was the first step in any fight. Though Logan doubted Jimmy had expected those lessons to apply like this. A faint tap at his window sent his pulse racing. Keeping to the blind spots he had mapped out, he crept over and peered outside. From the treeline, a small red light blinked. Morse code. Soon. Be ready. Heart pounding, Logan reached for his reading light. Careful. Controlled. A narrow beam flickered back his response. Understood. Downstairs, Luis was grabbing coffee. 3 minutes until he returned. Like clockwork. The signal and the setup. In the dense woods, Jimmy recorded another small victory. Logan's signal had confirmed everything Rico had spilled. The guard rotations were precise, the shift changes consistent. His son's intelligence and resourcefulness filled Jimmy with pride and rage. That a child should need such skills was an injustice he couldn't forgive. His phone vibrated. Marcus. Nico Delgado just turned up behind the pink flamingo, the detective reported. Alive, but shaken. He's demanding protective custody. Jimmy exhaled through his nose. Did he say why? Marcus chuckled dryly. Claims he met death in a leather jacket. Very poetic. A pause. Jimmy, Victor's bringing in reinforcements. If you're going to act, do it soon. Jimmy was already ahead of him. It's in motion. But I need one more thing. Name it. A distraction? Tomorrow night. East side of the property. Just enough to pull their focus without setting off full alarms. Marcus understood instantly. I'll have a patrol car respond to a noise complaint. Routine procedure. Nothing suspicious. Perfect. Jimmy ended the call and refocused on the house. The next piece of the puzzle arrived just before dawn. An unexpected ally. Elena Castillo, former DA agent turned private investigator, made contact through one of Marcus' secure channels. Her message was simple but carried weight. My brother died in one of Victor's labs. I have files you need to see. They met at a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town. Sophie was sharp-featured, with the restless posture of someone accustomed to looking over her shoulder. Victor's operation goes deeper than drugs, she said, sliding a thumb drive across the table. Jimmy pocketed it. How deep? Human trafficking, money laundering, political bribes, she listed grimly. I've been building a case for 2 years. Why help me? Sophie's gaze darkened. Because you'll do what law enforcement won't. Jimmy didn't argue. He reviewed the files back in his motel room, each document adding another layer to Victor's criminal empire. The cartel leader hadn't chosen Jimmy's home randomly. Its location was ideal for distribution, and its owner, a Marine with a clean record, provided the perfect cover. And Claire? She had been the key. The piece that made everything fit. By sunrise on the 3rd day of his return, every piece was locked in place. Rico's interrogation had provided operational details. Marcus' connections had created strategic opportunities. Sophie's intelligence had filled in the gaps. Now, it was time to strike. Victor tightens his grip. Javier Morales was not a man who panicked. Seated in the study of Jimmy's house, he met with his inner circle, the air thick with cigar smoke and quiet tension. Andres Vega, his lieutenant, leaned forward, voice sharp. The sniper is playing with us. Rico was a message. We should move the operation. Victor dismissed the idea with a wave. This location is perfect. Diego pressed on. And the kid? He shot a glance toward the ceiling, where Logan slept. Children talk. Make mistakes. Victor smiled. Children also ensure cooperation. His gaze flickered toward Claire, who lingered near the door, silent. Isn't that right, mi amor? Claire nodded mechanically, but her eyes betrayed her doubt. She had seen the shift, the slow transformation of Victor's empire from a smooth operation into something brutal. The man who had once promised her excitement and security now ran his world with blood-stained hands. And the more she saw, the less she could ignore it. Victor exhaled a stream of smoke. Speaking of cooperation, he turned to her. It's time we gave Jimmy another chance to reconsider. Claire hesitated. Victor gestured toward the phone. Call him. Her hands shook as she dialed. The call went straight to voicemail. Victor smirked. No matter. He'll reach out soon enough. The final choice. The tension coiled like a spring. Each player had made their opening move. But the real game had yet to begin. Jimmy had come home to save his son, but he'd stumbled into something far bigger. A web of corruption. A system built on violence and betrayal. To survive, he would need more than military training. Through his rifle scope, he watched as the night shift changed. His finger rested lightly on the trigger. Tomorrow, Marcus' distraction would provide his opening. Sophie's intelligence would help him navigate Victor's defenses. But first, he had one more person to contact. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a burner phone and dialed Claire's private number. She answered on the first ring. Jimmy's voice was calm. Controlled. You've got one chance, he said. One chance to help me save our son. A pause. After that, Claire, you're on your own. The line went silent. Claire's breath hitched as she stared at the phone. She had spent months convincing herself she had control. That she had made the right choice. That Victor was the better man. Now, faced with reality, she realized the truth. She had betrayed the wrong person. Her moment of truth had arrived. Chapter 4: Breaking Point. Claire gripped the edges of the porcelain sink, staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, evidence of sleepless nights spent questioning everything. The bathroom fan hummed, masking her whispered conversation on the burner phone. "The photos you sent," she said softly. "Where did you get them?" Jimmy's voice was distant, unreadable. "Does it matter?" Claire swallowed hard. "Victor, he told me we were family. He tells people exactly what they need to hear." The weight of his words pressed down on her. "You're not special, Claire. You're disposable." The truth hit her like a blow to the chest. She had traded her real family for an illusion, and now, that illusion was crumbling. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Watch. Listen. Report. But most importantly, keep Logan safe." A knock at the bathroom door made Claire jump. "1 minute," she called. On the phone, Jimmy's voice was steady. "Take your time." Outside, Victor's voice drifted through the door. "Mi amor, we have that meeting with our distributors soon." Claire closed her eyes. When she opened the door, Victor stood waiting, the picture of calm control. Impeccably dressed. Confident. But the charm was gone now. His smile no longer held warmth, only possession. And Claire knew in that moment that if she wanted to survive, she would have to choose a side. The cracks began to show. Victor's eyes flicked over Claire's face, studying her with quiet intensity. "You seem tense," he observed, his fingers grazing her cheek. "Perhaps you should rest today. Skip the meeting." Claire forced a smile. "I'm fine. Just tired." Victor's hand lingered a moment longer, his touch a silent warning. "You'd tell me if something was bothering you, wouldn't you?" His tone was casual, but the weight behind the words was unmistakable. "If someone had contacted you?" She met his gaze without flinching. "Of course." Down the hall, Andres Vega observed the exchange with growing unease. He had served Victor loyally for years, but something about this operation had never sat right. Using a Marine sniper's home as a cartel hub was reckless. Keeping his son as leverage was outright suicidal. Diego's phone vibrated. Another sighting of Jimmy Callahan. The Marine had been spotted near the warehouse district, watching deliveries, photographing schedules. Victor had brushed it off as expected, predictable reconnaissance. But Diego wasn't so sure. "He's testing us," Diego muttered under his breath. "Timing our responses. Looking for patterns." The gathering storm. In the basement, Logan sat cross-legged on the thin mattress that served as his bed, eyes fixed on a comic book. But he wasn't reading. He was listening. 2 guards stood near the door, engaged in hushed conversation. "Victor's moving the big shipment up," Luis muttered. "Boss is spooked about the sniper." The other man snorted. "Thought he had it under control." "Yeah, well," Rico sang like a damn bird in protective custody. "Told the cops everything about the warehouse." Logan kept his face neutral, turning a page in his comic. But inside his thoughts raced. Dad's making them nervous. Making them change their plans. Just like on their hunting trips, when his father would explain how to push prey into making mistakes. Upstairs, the sky rumbled, heavy storm clouds rolling in as evening fell. 2 blocks away, Elena Castillo sat in her parked car, a police scanner crackling beside her. The cartel's radio frequencies buzzed with paranoia, frequent check-ins, tighter patrols, tense chatter about the Marine ghost in their midst. Her phone vibrated. "Jimmy, warehouse intel confirmed?" She responded immediately. "Sophie, yes. Major shipment tomorrow night. They're rushing it because of Rico." A pause. Then, "Jimmy, perfect." Sophie exhaled slowly, a grim smile forming. She had spent years building a case against Victor. Collecting evidence. Watching the justice system fail. Now, for the first time, she had an ally who wouldn't fail. The war room. At the police station, Adrian Bishop scanned through Jimmy's latest intelligence drop. The photos. The bribes. The smuggling routes. It was enough to dismantle Victor's empire, if they could find a legal way to use it. An officer knocked at his door. "Detective? Nico Delgado is demanding a transfer." Says his safe house isn't secure enough. Marcus leaned back, thinking. Rico's fear was an asset. Tell him we'll move him tonight, he said. But we use my route. The noose was tightening. Jimmy's relentless pressure was forcing Victor's empire to fracture. Even Claire's reluctant cooperation was providing key intel. And Logan, that kid, had given them the most valuable piece of all, the patterns. Victor's next move? As night fell, Victor paced Jimmy's study. His study now. Or so he told himself. The room still carried echoes of its former owner, military commendations, framed family photos. He picked one up, studying Jimmy's face in dress blues, Claire and Logan standing beside him. You should have stayed in Afghanistan, Victor murmured to the photo. Heroes don't belong in my world. A knock at the door. Diego entered, tablet in hand. Boss, we found something. He placed the device on the desk, pulling up a grainy surveillance feed. Victor's eyes narrowed. The footage showed Callahan in the warehouse district, meeting with a woman. Elena Castillo. Victor's expression darkened. The one who's been investigating us. Diego nodded. Former DA. She's been after us for years. Victor set the photo down carefully. Then it's time we change the game. He turned toward the hallway. Bring me Logan. Diego hesitated. Sir. Victor's tone left no room for argument. If Callahan wants to play hero, he said, let's give him a villain to fight. The last warning. Claire stood just outside the study, heart pounding. She had heard everything. Hands trembling, she pulled out the burner phone. Claire, moving Logan. Something's wrong. Victor knows about Sophie. The reply came instantly. Jimmy, get our son ready. It starts tonight. Chapter 5, The Siege Begins. The warehouse loomed in the dark, metal walls glinting under flickering security lights. Jimmy crouched low, binoculars in hand, watching the movement below. Trucks arrived in steady intervals, cartel members unloading crates with practiced efficiency. Sophie whispered beside him. 17 guards total. 4 on the perimeter. Rest inside. Jimmy lowered the binoculars. And the shipment? Chemical precursors, Sophie said. Raw materials for their lab operation. Jimmy smirked. Victor's rushing production. Getting sloppy. 3 blocks away, Marcus sat in his unmarked car, listening to the police scanner. He had arranged for patrols to avoid this sector tonight. The radio crackled with routine reports, white noise to mask what was about to happen. Jimmy checked his gear one final time. The explosives were small, targeted, designed to create confusion, not destruction. He turned to Sophie. Remember, this is a distraction. She arched an eyebrow. You sure about the timing? Victor expects you to hit the warehouse. It's the obvious target. Jimmy slid a knife into his belt. Exactly, he said. Which means his security is already stretched thin. The first blow. Inside the warehouse, the operation ran like clockwork. Workers moved quickly, loading pallets with industrial chemicals. Armed guards patrolled, disciplined but anxious. Rico's betrayal had rattled them. Then, a detonation rocked the loading dock. Flames bloomed, scattering workers and sending guards scrambling for cover. Smoke billowed into the air, thick and suffocating. A second explosion followed, closer to the chemical storage. Panic set in. Security scattered. Victor's empire was built on power, on control. And in an instant, Jimmy Callahan had taken that control away. The hunt begins. Nobody noticed Sophie slip through the side door. While Jimmy's distraction kept the warehouse in chaos, she moved fast, fingers flying over a keyboard, downloading every file she could find. We've got company, a guard shouted from the loading dock. The sniper. Gunfire erupted, bullets tearing through crates and metal walls. But they weren't firing at Jimmy. Not really. Speakers planted throughout the warehouse played recorded footsteps and the clatter of shifting equipment, tricking Victor's men into chasing ghosts. Every false sighting pulled more guards from their posts, spreading them thin. Victor's empire crumbles. Victor's phone rang. Standing in Jimmy's study, the former Marines awards and photos still lining the walls, he watched live security feeds flicker across multiple screens. "Talk to me," he snapped. "The warehouse is under attack." Diego's voice barely cut through the chaos. Alarms blaring, men shouting, gunfire in the background. Multiple explosions, possible shooter on the roof. "How many casualties?" "None yet," Diego admitted. "It's smoke and noise tactics. They're not trying to kill us, they're messing with our response times." A pause. "Wait. The computers." Victor's grip tightened on the phone. "What about them?" "Someone's accessing our files." A slow exhale. A flash of pure fury. "Protect those records." Victor's tone turned deadly. "And find me Callahan." But Jimmy was already gone. The escape. Claire heard the distant explosions and knew her moment had come. Heart pounding, she moved toward Logan's room. Luis stood guard outside, his attention split between the door and the radio chatter in his earpiece. "Victor wants the boy moved," Claire said, keeping her voice even. Luis frowned. "Safe house protocol? Orders are confused because of the attack," she said smoothly. "You want to call Victor and question his decisions?" Luis hesitated. That hesitation was all she needed. Claire pushed open the door. Inside, Logan was already waiting, backpack strapped on, shoes laced. She swallowed the lump in her throat. "You ready, honey?" Logan nodded. His movements were steady, practiced. No panic. Just preparation. They moved swiftly through the hall, making it halfway to the garage before the radio in Luis's pocket crackled to life. "Stop them!" Victor's voice thundered over the frequency. "The woman and the boy don't leave." Luis spun, raising his weapon. "BZZZT." Claire's hidden taser struck his chest. The shock sent him convulsing to the ground, giving them the precious seconds they needed. "The back door," Logan said, already moving. "Dad showed me how to disappear into the woods." Claire blinked at his calm but followed, heart hammering. Flashlights swept across the property as Victor's men scrambled to react. "Find them!" Victor's rage echoed across the estate. "Bring me the boy!" But the forest belonged to Jimmy and Logan. Logan weaved through the dark, slipping between trees, guiding his mother down paths he had mapped during his captivity. Behind them, fresh explosions lit up the night, Jimmy's final distractions, pulling more attention away. Sophie's voice crackled in Claire's hidden earpiece. "Keep moving southeast. Marcus has a car waiting 2 miles out. Defections begin." At the warehouse, Andres Vega slipped away from his post. He had seen enough. Victor's obsession with hurting Callahan was reckless. Dangerous. And the second he ordered Logan brought to him, Diego knew Victor wasn't thinking strategically anymore. He was spiraling. Diego checked his phone. It contained everything: transaction records, coded messages, internal schedules. Enough to buy him immunity if he got to the FBI first. He hurried to his backup vehicle, already planning his next move. The unraveling. At Rico's safe house, Adrian Bishop watched the operation unfold through status updates on his phone. The former cartel member paced anxiously. "I heard explosions. Nothing to worry about." Marcus gave him a slow, knowing smile. "Just some routine police work." Jimmy's pressure had shattered Victor's control. The warehouse raid had. Heavy check mark destroyed his supply chain. Heavy check mark stolen crucial evidence. Heavy check mark made Victor afraid. And fear made men like Victor sloppy. Victor stood in his command center, watching his empire crumble. The warehouse gone. Claire gone. Logan gone. And now, Diego was missing. His knuckles whitened around his whiskey glass. "Find Diego," he snarled. "And bring me someone who can trace those computer breaches." But Sophie had done her job well. The warehouse files weren't just stolen, they were corrupted. Years of money laundering records, transaction logs, blackmail files, all gone. Jimmy watched from a distance, his rifle scope trained on the house. The once perfect security formations were falling apart. Guards clustered together, moving nervously. Their discipline had shattered. Perfect. Chapter 6: Into the Lion's Den. Javier Morales had always prided himself on control. Now, standing in his ruined command center, he felt it slipping through his fingers. Claire and Logan's escape had triggered panic. Diego had disappeared. And now, Victor's best hackers couldn't recover the data Sophie had stolen. Report. He snapped into his phone. A static-filled response. No sign of them in the woods, but we found something else, Diego's car, abandoned near the highway. His phones are dead. Victor hurled his whiskey glass against the wall. Diego knew too much. His most trusted lieutenant had turned on him. And that betrayal was a wound that could be fatal. Find him, Victor ordered. Now. His mind raced. He had lost too much ground. He needed to take back control. Bring in out-of-state reinforcements, he growled. Heavy hitters. The final play. Jimmy lay in the underbrush, watching the house through thermal imaging. The cracks in Victor's security were widening. Guards clustering in groups. Blind spots forming. The rhythm of patrols breaking down. Marcus' voice crackled over Jimmy's secure radio. Status on the package? Jimmy exhaled. Claire and Logan? Safe, Marcus confirmed. Sophie's uploading the files now. A pause. But Jimmy, Victor's called in reinforcements. Heavy hitters. Out of state. Jimmy's voice remained calm. How long? 3, maybe 4 hours. Jimmy adjusted his grip on his rifle. More than enough time. Because before Victor's reinforcements even arrived, Jimmy Callahan would end this. The siege begins. Jimmy checked his watch. Just enough time. Barely. He pressed the radio to his lips. Maintain the perimeter. No police response unless I give the signal. Inside the house, Victor's remaining men worked frantically, boarding up windows, creating choke points, setting up kill zones. They had learned to fear the unseen sniper. Every flicker of movement outside had them flinching, jumping at shadows. A crack in the foundation. Sir? A nervous guard approached Victor cautiously, sweat beading at his brow. We found traces of Claire's phone activity. She's been communicating with someone for days. Encoded messages through a burner phone. Victor's jaw clenched. And you're just telling me this now? The blow came fast, his backhand splitting the man's lip, sending him stumbling backward. We only found the pattern after checking everyone's communications, the guard stammered. After Diego. Victor exhaled slowly, controlling the rage burning inside him. Get out. The guard scrambled away. Victor poured himself another drink, his fingers tightening around the glass. The study still smelled of Callahan. His presence clung to the walls, the awards, the family photographs left in place like ghosts whispering accusations. He turned to the financial reports. The numbers confirmed what he already knew. The warehouse destruction. Diego's defection. Sophie's cyber attack. All had crippled his empire. And then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Victor answered. Having staff problems? Jimmy's voice was calm. Unrushed. Victor gritted his teeth. Come to gloat, Marine? No, Jimmy replied smoothly. Coming to end this. Victor paced the room, gripping the phone so tightly his fingers ached. You're finished, Victor. Diego's talking to the FBI right now. Sophie has your files. Marcus has enough evidence to bring down your political protection. Victor's breath came slow and measured, but his pulse pounded. And yet here you are, he countered. Calling instead of attacking. What's the delay? Jimmy's voice was ice. Professional courtesy. A pause. Surrender now, Victor. You might survive what's coming. Victor laughed. A forced, hollow sound. You think I got to where I am by surrendering? This is my house now. My territory. Jimmy's voice hardened. No. It's my home. A long, empty silence. Then, you're just a temporary infection. The line went dead. Victor stared at the phone in his hand. For the first time in years, doubt crept into his thoughts. He issued new orders, positioning snipers, setting fallback points, preparing for siege. But the confidence that had marked his rise to power was gone. And Jimmy Callahan was already coming. A darker truth. Jimmy moved silently through the night, every step carrying him closer to the house he had once called home. The garden shed stood undisturbed, a hidden cache he had prepared months ago, somehow knowing, that trouble was coming. He slipped inside, retrieving weapons, extra ammunition, tactical gear. His radio crackled. "Jimmy!" Sophie's voice was urgent. "The files we recovered, there's something else." Jimmy adjusted the earpiece. "Go. Victor wasn't just using your house for drug distribution. He's been running weapons." Jimmy frowned. "Cartel smuggling arms isn't news." Sophie's hesitation made his stomach tighten. "No, Jimmy. Not cartel shipments. Terrorist cells. International networks. He's been selling to war zones." The information hit him like a hammer. "This goes way beyond a cartel operation," she finished. "Does Marcus know?" "Briefing him now." "But Jimmy..." A pause. "The reinforcements Victor's calling? They're not cartel." Jimmy's grip tightened on the rifle in his hands. "They're mercenaries. Former special forces. Professionals." Jimmy absorbed the intel, adjusting his plans. This wasn't just vengeance anymore. Now, stopping Victor wasn't about his home. It was about stopping something much worse. Hard truths. At the safe house, Claire held Logan close, her arms wrapped protectively around him as Marcus coordinated with the FBI. Logan hadn't spoken much since their escape. But his gaze was clear. Sharp. "Did Dad teach you those escape routes?" Claire asked softly. Logan nodded. "He said always know your exit points. Always have a backup plan." A pause. His young eyes met hers, searching. "Did you really not know what Victor was doing?" Claire felt the question like a slap. Her throat tightened. "I knew some of it," she admitted. "But not everything. Not about the weapons, or—" She trailed off, unable to finish. The truth was, she had chosen not to know. And her son saw it. The door opened, Marcus stepping in, his face grim. "FBI's moving on the intel," he said. "But Victor's mercenaries are already in play. 3 teams. Former special forces." Claire's stomach twisted. "Can't you stop them?" Marcus exhaled. "Not without exposing our operation. Right now, they think it's just a cartel dispute. If we move in now, it becomes a bloodbath." The first shot. Inside the house, Victor paced the study as reports flooded in. His reinforcements were deploying, locking down the surrounding streets, turning the entire neighborhood into a war zone. But the paranoia gnawed at him. Jimmy had known about the weapons shipments. Jimmy had targeted specific computer files. Which meant someone close to him had betrayed him long before Diego's defection. A guard burst in. "Sir, we found surveillance equipment in the basement, cameras, microphones. Some of it's been there for months." Victor's fingers curled into a fist. Claire hadn't just helped Jimmy recently. She had been his eyes and ears from the beginning. Layer by layer, his control unraveled. His phone buzzed again. Not Jimmy. His superiors. The real power behind his empire. They wanted answers, about the warehouse, the files, the losses. Victor's explanation sounded hollow, even to himself. And then... crack. A sharp, silenced shot split the night. A guard at the front gate dropped. The others panicked, whirling with weapons raised, searching the shadows. Jimmy wasn't announcing his presence anymore. He was hunting. The final battle begins. Victor grabbed his rifle, his instincts taking over. "Contact front," someone shouted. "He's..." Crack. The second shot cut them off. Victor inhaled sharply, eyes scanning the dark. This wasn't a siege. This wasn't a standoff. This was an extraction mission. And Jimmy Callahan? He had already won. The final stand. Establish crossfire positions. Don't bunch up. The mercenary commander's orders came swiftly, but it didn't matter. Jimmy had already studied their tactics, knew their training inside and out. Each shot he fired didn't just take out a target, it forced them to react predictably, driving them into pre-sighted kill zones. The realization hit the professionals too late. "He's not attacking," one of them radioed. "He's hunting us." Sophie monitored the police bands from her remote location, the distant echoes of gunfire punctuating her work. "Marcus, how's the blackout holding?" "Solid," the detective confirmed. "As far as the public's concerned, this is a routine federal training exercise. No civilian panic. No collateral damage." Jimmy was keeping his promises. The collapse of an empire. Inside the house, Victor stared at his security feeds, rage twisting his features. The mercenaries were pinned down, unable to advance, unable to retreat without exposing themselves. His men, reduced to frightened prey. "Where is he?" he snapped. Thermal imaging flickered across the monitors. Nothing. Jimmy had learned to counter such technology in Afghanistan, using terrain, timing, and ambient heat sources to vanish into the background. And then, a new sound. Thwump thwump thwump. Helicopters. The FBI. Victor's knuckles went white around his radio. Diego. That traitor had moved faster than expected. His information had proven decisive. His political protection was crumbling. His organization exposed. "Sir," the mercenary commander's voice came through. "We need to extract. This position is compromised." Victor's grip on reality frayed. This house was everything. The center of his empire. His power. Losing it meant losing himself. A flicker of movement caught his eye. A shadow in the hallway. He spun, firing blindly. Bullets shredded drywall and wood, but Jimmy was already gone, slipping through the house like a ghost. Victor roared into the emptiness. "Come face me, Callahan. No more sniper games." A beat. Then a voice. "Okay." Behind him. Victor whirled, but Jimmy was faster. The final fight. The fight was brutal. No words. No hesitation. Two killers. One fighting to defend his empire. The other to reclaim his home. Victor was strong, skilled, ruthless. He landed a solid strike, sending Jimmy staggering. "I own this place now," he spat. "Everything here belongs to me." Jimmy wiped blood from his lip. His voice was cold. "No." A step forward. "You're just a squatter." Another step. "And your time's up." The final exchange was swift. Victor's rage made him reckless. Jimmy's controlled fury made him precise. A block. A counter. A strike to the throat. Victor dropped, gasping for breath, his world crumbling around him. Jimmy flipped him over, zip-tying his hands as the first spotlights from the FBI helicopters illuminated the house. Outside, federal agents moved in, securing the estate, rounding up Victor's surviving men. His empire wasn't destroyed by a rival cartel. It wasn't taken down by federal agents. It was dismantled by a father protecting his family. Sophie's voice crackled through Jimmy's radio. "It's done, Callahan. The files are with the authorities. Diego's testimony is locked in. They're all going down." Jimmy exhaled. Mission complete. But the real work, repairing what was broken, was only beginning. Chapter 7: Rebuilding Trust. Jimmy sat across from Dr. Emily Wong, his gaze fixed on Logan through the one-way glass of the therapy room. His son sat at the table, sketching. Precise. Controlled. Too controlled for an 11-year-old. Dr. Chun flipped through her notes. "He's processing trauma differently than most kids," she noted. "More analytical, less emotional." Jimmy nodded. "He's using what I taught him. Observation. Analysis. Control." Dr. Chun placed her notepad down. "But now, he needs to learn that it's okay to feel vulnerable again." She met Jimmy's eyes. "Both of you do. The words hit harder than expected. Jimmy had spent years compartmentalizing his pain. It had made him an effective Marine, a lethal operator. But Logan wasn't a soldier. He was a kid. How do I help him? Jimmy asked quietly. Dr. Chun's voice was gentle but firm. Share your experiences. Not just the victories. The fears. The doubts. She leaned forward. Show him that strength isn't just surviving alone, it's knowing when to ask for help. Jimmy absorbed the words, watching Logan finish his drawing. A map of their house. Marked with guard positions, escape routes. Dr. Chun had encouraged him to document what happened, turn surveillance into therapy. Steps forward. Later that afternoon, father and son walked through their neighborhood. The FBI had cleared out. The media attention had faded. But the whispers remained. Neighbors watched them with a mix of curiosity and concern. Jimmy spoke carefully. Your mom called again. Logan kept his eyes forward. What about? Whatever you want, Jimmy said. On your terms. They stopped walking. But you don't have to talk to her if you're not ready. Logan hesitated. Did you forgive her? Jimmy considered his answer. I'm working on it. A pause. Forgiveness isn't easy, he admitted. But holding on to anger? He gestured around them. That's what turned Victor into what he was. Logan frowned. Victor wasn't always bad? Jimmy sighed. No one starts that way. He met his son's eyes. People make choices. Justify them. Lose their way bit by bit. The words sank in. They reached the local park, the place where Jimmy had once taught Logan to play catch. Logan looked at the familiar field. His fingers twitched. Can we? He hesitated. Jimmy followed his gaze. No need for words. He pulled 2 mitts and a baseball from his bag. Some things didn't need explanations. Just a father and son, rebuilding trust, one throw at a time. Loose ends. At the police station, Adrian Bishop reviewed the latest case files. Victor's downfall had exposed deep corruption, leading to arrests and resignations across multiple agencies. A knock on his door. Detective? One of his officers stepped inside. There's someone here to see you. Marcus looked up, just in time to see Jimmy Callahan step into the room. He carried a thick envelope, placing it on the desk. Final debrief materials, Jimmy said. Sophie compiled everything. Money trails. Political connections. International links. Marcus accepted the files. How's the boy? Jimmy exhaled. Getting better. He met Marcus's eyes. Taking time. A long pause. Then, I need a favor. Marcus folded his arms. Name it. Jimmy sat down. His eyes were steady. I need to disappear. Chapter 8, Lessons Learned. The morning sun streamed through the newly installed windows, illuminating the fresh start Jimmy and Logan were building. At the kitchen table, Jimmy sifted through security consulting proposals. After the incident, several local businesses had sought his expertise, not just in physical security, but in identifying internal vulnerabilities. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Diego's protection detail reports, all clear. He's settling into his new life. Jimmy set the phone down, exhaling slowly. Some paths diverged. Diego had chosen redemption, using his skills to help instead of harm. Victor had chosen destruction, dying in federal custody from wounds sustained in their final confrontation. One man rebuilt. The other self-destructed. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Dr. Emily Wong stood there, holding a folder. May I come in? A different kind of progress. Jimmy led her to the kitchen, where coffee waited. They had developed an easy professional rapport over the weeks of therapy sessions. Dr. Chun set the folder down and spread out Logan's latest drawings. These show significant change, she explained, pointing to details in the sketches. Jimmy's eyes scanned the paper. The house was no longer just a blueprint for defense, no longer a cold, tactical map. It held details. Memories. A baseball game at the park. A camping trip from before everything fell apart. He played last weekend without scanning for threats, Jimmy murmured, recognizing the moment in one of the drawings. Dr. Chun nodded. Exactly. He's shifting from survival mode to resilience, seeing his life as more than just threats to neutralize. She hesitated, choosing her next words carefully. And that brings me to Claire's request for joint sessions. Jimmy's hand tightened around his coffee mug. Logan's not ready. Dr. Chun tilted her head slightly. Actually, he asked about it yesterday. Jimmy looked up sharply. His words were, maybe Mom needs to heal too. Jimmy sat back, processing that. The simple wisdom of children, seeing what adults were too stubborn to acknowledge. Recovery wasn't a solo mission. Sharing the burden. Later that day, at the Veterans Center, Jimmy sat in group session. He shared the insight Logan had given him. Across the circle, Kevin Dawson, the young Marine he had spoken with before, nodded in recognition. My wife said something similar, Mike admitted. After my last tour, I kept everything locked down. She told me, healing happens in relationships, not isolation. Jimmy let those words settle. Smart woman, he said. Took me too long to learn that lesson. The group discussed strategies for reconnecting with family, for bridging the gaps trauma created. For Jimmy, it wasn't about forgiving Claire completely, not yet. But it was about recognizing that she was trying to find her way back. That had to count for something. First steps. That afternoon, Logan had his first supervised visit with Claire at the therapy office. Jimmy waited outside, close enough to be there if needed, but far enough to give them space. Through the window, he saw Claire sitting with their son. She had lost weight in federal custody. Her face was paler. But her eyes were clearer than they had been in years. Dr. Chun guided the conversation, keeping it structured, ensuring neither mother nor son felt overwhelmed. Jimmy saw Logan's small nods, the way he listened. He wasn't ready to trust her completely. But he was willing to try. And that was something. Rebuilding, one brick at a time. That night, Jimmy prepared dinner while Logan worked on his homework at the kitchen table. The routine felt familiar. And yet, everything was different, overlaid with a deeper appreciation for what they had. Logan suddenly looked up. Dad? Jimmy glanced over. Yeah, buddy? Logan hesitated. Remember when you taught me Morse code? Jimmy smirked. Sure do. Came in handy, didn't it? Logan nodded. Then, quietly, he said, Could you teach me more? Not just for emergencies. Not just for survival. But because it was something they shared. Jimmy's chest tightened, not with pain, but with something else. Something like hope. How about we start with the advanced stuff? He said, setting down his dish towel. Military signals, operational codes. Logan's face lit up, genuine enthusiasm flickering through the cracks of his recent trauma. Together, they bent over the table, drawing diagrams, scribbling signals. Not as a means to escape danger, but as a way to strengthen the bond between them. Letters and closure. Later, after Logan had gone to bed, Jimmy sat alone in the rebuilt study. Claire's last letter lay unopened on the desk. Her explanation. Her apology. Her hope for redemption. Jimmy stared at it for a long time. He wasn't ready yet. But someday, for Logan's sake, and maybe for his own, he would be. This quiet moment of reflection and potential set up the deeper emotional resolutions to come. The technical details of home repair and security mirrored the careful reconstruction of family bonds. Each requiring patience, skill, and a willingness to rebuild from the foundation up. Chapter 9, A Brighter Horizon. Claire's voice was steady, though tinged with regret. I don't expect forgiveness, she told Logan. I just want you to know how sorry I am. And how proud I am of how brave you've been. Logan studied his mother. Not with suspicion, not as a threat, but to understand. Did Victor trick you? He asked. Like he tricked his other people? Claire swallowed. At first. She hesitated before adding. But then I made choices. Bad choices. I forgot what really mattered. Logan nodded, his expression thoughtful. Dad says choices can be fixed, if you're brave enough to try. Claire glanced toward the observation window, where she knew Jimmy was watching. Your father's a wise man, she said. Wiser than I was. The session ended with tentative plans for future meetings. As they stepped outside, Logan surprised both parents by hugging Claire goodbye. Quick. Careful. But genuine. Facing the past. On the drive home, Jimmy broke the silence. You okay, buddy? Logan watched the familiar streets pass by. Yeah. A pause. Mom's different now. More like before. Jimmy nodded. People can change, he said. Especially when they face their mistakes. Like Diego? Exactly. Jimmy navigated through traffic, considering his next words. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't against other people, he said. They're against the parts of ourselves we don't want to face. Ripples of change. At home, Sophie was waiting with updates. The international investigation has expanded, she reported. Victor's operation wasn't just a cartel empire. It was part of something bigger. She handed Jimmy a folder. Your evidence helped shut down 3 more labs. And Claire's testimony? Jimmy asked. Sophie exhaled. It's giving families closure. Helping them understand what happened to their loved ones. Logan, doing his homework nearby, listened quietly. His mother's past mistakes were being transformed into something good. Just like his own trauma had led to a stronger bond with his father. As night settled, Jimmy's phone buzzed. A message from Diego. A photo, him teaching at-risk youth mechanical skills, sharing his story of redemption. Jimmy murmured, second chances? Logan looked up. Like Mom's trying to get? Jimmy nodded. Different paths, he said. Same destination. Trying to make things right. New bonds. They worked on dinner together. Their movements synchronized, their kitchen a space of quiet teamwork. Logan had taken an interest in cooking, finding comfort in precise measurements and predictable results. Dad, he said, carefully measuring pasta. Could we invite Mom for dinner sometime? Not now, but maybe, when we're all ready? Jimmy paused mid-chop, hearing the mix of hope and hesitation in his son's voice. Yeah, buddy. His voice was steady. When we're ready, we can do that. A step into the future. The high school auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Students and parents gathered for the state writing competition awards. Logan sat with his classmates, his essay rising from shadows tucked safely in his folder. Jimmy watched from the audience, noting how much his son had grown. Logan stood straighter now. His confidence wasn't forced, it was earned. Beside him, Claire whispered, He's going to win. Their cautious reconciliation had reached the point where they could attend school events together. Not as a family restored, but as a family learning how to move forward. The principal stepped up to the podium. Our next award goes to a young man who wrote about overcoming adversity through family bonds and personal courage. Jimmy listened as Logan read an excerpt from his essay. My father taught me that strength isn't about being unafraid. Logan read. It's about facing fears with people you trust. Sometimes the bravest thing is asking for help. Healing, one story at a time. At the reception, Marcus arrived with new updates. Task Force identified 2 more corruption networks using your intel. He handed Jimmy a report. The ripple effects keep spreading. Good, Jimmy murmured, watching Logan proudly show Claire his trophy. Change has to start somewhere. Marcus nodded toward the entrance, where Sophie stood with a group of teenagers. Survivors. Young men and women whose lives had been stolen by Victor's trafficking operations. Now they were reclaiming their voices, turning pain into advocacy. Sophie's nonprofit was giving them a chance to rebuild. Jimmy recognized the healing process. The same journey Logan was on. The same one he was still walking himself. Lessons in connection. At the Veterans Center, Jimmy sat in group session. Kevin Dawson, once a wary, struggling Marine, was now a regular attendee. This time, he brought his wife. I thought I had to handle everything alone, Mike admitted. Thought I was protecting my family by keeping them at a distance. He exhaled. But that's not protection. That's another kind of harm. Jimmy nodded, thinking of his own journey with Logan. We trained to be self-reliant, he said. But the real mission? He let the words settle. Learning to connect again. The discussion evolved into family reintegration, about bridging the gaps between military precision and emotional vulnerability. Jimmy found himself talking about baseball games, about cooking lessons, about homework help. The simple moments that made all the difference. A house restored. Back home, father and son worked on their latest project, converting the former command center into a proper study room. Each change to the house was another step away from darkness. Found this while cleaning, Logan said, holding up an old family photo. Jimmy in dress blues. Claire in a summer dress. Their family, before the storm. Jimmy studied it. Good times, he said softly. But then he smiled. You know what? We're making new good times. Logan grinned. Like when Mom came to my science fair? Exactly. Jimmy hung the photo beside Logan's writing competition certificate. Life's not about avoiding falls. It's about how we get back up. Redemption in motion. That evening, Sophie visited with an update. Diego's doing well, she reported. He's a valued resource in youth intervention programs now. Jimmy nodded. He asked about you both, Sophie added. Wanted you to know he's honoring his second chance. Logan, setting the dinner table, paused. Dad says redemption is a choice we make every day. Sophie smiled. Smart man, your father. Jimmy watched the exchange in quiet satisfaction. The tactical awareness that had kept Logan alive in captivity had evolved into something deeper. A greater understanding of human complexity. Claire's therapy sessions had progressed to family counseling. Today's topic? Trust. How to rebuild it. How to maintain it. I'm not asking to erase what happened, Claire said in session. Just a chance to prove change is possible. Like Diego did. Logan studied her. Similar journey. Then he glanced at Jimmy. Different path. Jimmy nodded. Exactly. Epilogue, 10 years later. Logan Callahan adjusted his tie in the mirror of his university office, the polished reflection of a man who had come full circle. At 21, he carried himself with quiet confidence, his father's steady strength, tempered by years of healing and growth. The nameplate on his door read, Guest Lecturer, Criminal Psychology and Trauma Recovery. A knock interrupted his preparation. Ready for your first lecture, Professor? Jimmy stood in the doorway, gray now streaking his hair, but his stance still military straight. Logan smirked, straightening his notes. Did you bring them? Jimmy held up a manila folder, case files from the Javier Morales investigation, sanitized for classroom use, approved by Marcus. Father and son walked together through the bustling campus halls toward the lecture theater. 10 years had changed everything, but their bond had only grown stronger. A full house. The auditorium was packed. Students filled every seat, drawn by Logan's unique perspective. His award-winning high school essay had evolved into a best-selling memoir on trauma recovery and family resilience. Jimmy surveyed the audience, recognizing familiar faces. Elena Castillo sat in the back row, her nonprofit organization now a national leader in supporting families affected by organized crime. Beside her, Adrian Bishop, now police commissioner, nodded encouragingly. Logan stepped to the podium, scanning the eager young minds before him. Good morning, he began. Today, we'll be discussing how trauma affects family dynamics and how understanding criminal psychology can aid in recovery. He gestured to his father. I'm joined today by Ryan Callahan, former Marine sniper and now head of Callahan Security Consulting. Jimmy took his place at the front, his presence commanding yet calm. 10 years ago, Logan continued, Our family faced a crisis that reshaped our understanding of trauma, recovery, and redemption. The lessons we learned extend far beyond our personal experience. The lecture unfolded as a masterclass in resilience. Logan spoke of psychological healing and rebuilding trust. Jimmy shared insights from military training, how discipline and adaptability had helped turn trauma into strength. They traded perspectives, blending their experiences into something powerful and universal. By the time they finished, the room was silent. Then came the applause. Not just polite clapping, but something deeper. Recognition. Respect. A realization that survival wasn't just about enduring pain, but about transforming it. Reunion of allies. After the lecture, they gathered in Logan's office with Sophie and Marcus. Time had turned former allies into family. Sophie smiled as she set down her coffee. Diego's program is expanding again. 6 new intervention centers opening next month. His story still resonates with troubled kids. Andres Vega had turned his second chance into a mission, helping others avoid the path he once walked. His rehabilitation centers had saved hundreds of young lives, turning potential criminals into community leaders. And Claire? Jimmy asked. She's speaking at the grand opening, Marcus said. Her perspective, as a mother who lost her way and found it again, really connects with parents. Jimmy nodded, thinking of the long, difficult road she had traveled. Redemption wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about proving, every day, that change was real. A legacy of strength. Later that evening, father and son walked through campus together. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows on the familiar streets. You did good today, Jimmy said. Logan smirked. So did you. For a moment neither spoke, just walked, taking in the moment. Then, Logan chuckled. Remember when you taught me Morse code? Jimmy smirked. Sure do. Came in handy, didn't it? Logan nodded. But you know what? He said, his voice thoughtful. I think that was never really about emergencies. Jimmy raised an eyebrow. Logan glanced over, grinning. It was about communication. About knowing you had someone who would always hear you. Jimmy's chest tightened, not with grief, but with pride. Damn. The kid was smart. And he was right. Jimmy slung an arm around his son's shoulders. Yeah, buddy, he murmured. That's exactly what it was. Their shadows stretched together, merging in the golden streetlights. A father and son. 2 warriors who had walked through fire and built something stronger from the ashes. Final epilogue, a legacy of strength. Claire had served her reduced sentence, then dedicated herself to family restoration work. She and Jimmy had found a new kind of relationship, no longer romantic partners, but committed co-parents and friends. At a small gathering one evening, Sophie turned to Jimmy. How's the new security contract? Going well, Jimmy replied. Training corporate teams to spot internal threats, prevent infiltration. Using what we learned from Victor's operation to protect legitimate businesses. Callahan's security had become an industry leader, known for blending military precision with psychological insight. His teams didn't just guard assets, they built resilient organizations from the inside out. The conversation turned to recent developments. Marcus' anti-corruption task force had evolved into a national model, its success rooted in lessons learned during the Mendez investigation. Sophie's nonprofit now worked directly with law enforcement, bridging the gap between official response and family support. Jimmy pulled out his phone. Remember Captain Hayes? He showed them an email. He's retiring next month. Wants us all at the ceremony. Hayes had stayed in touch, following their journey. His early decision to grant Jimmy emergency leave had set everything in motion, a moment of trust that had saved lives. Since then, Hayes had implemented new protocols for helping soldiers handle family crises, using their case as a teaching tool. A house reclaimed. Later that evening, they gathered at the old house. Still Jimmy and Logan's home, but transformed by time and healing. The study, where Victor had once plotted, now served as a community meeting space, hosting support groups for families in crisis. Claire arrived with dinner, her entrance comfortable and welcome. She had rebuilt trust gradually, proving through years of consistent choices that people can change. Her work with recovering addicts and families had earned national recognition. "Got something to show you," Logan said over dinner. He unrolled architectural plans on the table. "The new recovery center. We're breaking ground next month." The blueprints showed a state-of-the-art facility, blending security features with therapeutic design. Callahan's security would handle protection. Claire's family program and Diego's youth outreach would provide services. Jimmy studied the plans. "Full circle," he said. "Building something that would have helped us back then." "That's the point," Logan replied. "Taking what hurt us and using it to heal others. A united front. Each person represented a different aspect of recovery. Heavy checkmark Jimmy's protective strength. Heavy checkmark Claire's earned redemption. Heavy checkmark Sophie's pursuit of justice. Heavy checkmark Marcus' commitment to reform. Dr. Chun arrived later, now a close family friend and ongoing mentor. Her therapeutic insights had shaped Logan's academic work and Jimmy's security protocols. "Your family's journey has become a template," she noted, "showing how crisis response, law enforcement, and mental health support can work together." As night fell, they moved to the backyard, the site of so many crucial moments in their story. The space had been redesigned as a training area, where Jimmy and Logan taught self-defense classes for survivors of trauma. "Dad," Logan said, gesturing to the stars, "remember what you said that night after everything ended? About having each other, no matter what?" "Sure do. That's what we're building here, isn't it?" Logan asked. "Making sure other families have that kind of support." Jimmy looked around at their gathered friends. Once strangers brought together by crisis, now an unshakable support system. Each had taken their wounds and transformed them into wisdom, their pain into purpose. The conversation turned to upcoming projects. Heavy checkmark Sophie's nonprofit launching a new initiative for children affected by criminal violence. Heavy checkmark Marcus' department implementing family crisis intervention protocols. Heavy checkmark Claire's recovery program expanding to multiple states. Jimmy leaned back, exhaling. "You know what Victor never understood?" The group looked at him. "Real power isn't about control. It's about connection." Logan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's why he lost. He thought breaking us would make him stronger." Claire added softly, "Instead, it made us unbreakable." Looking to the future. The evening wound down with plans for the future. Heavy checkmark Logan's academic career was rising, his work bridging military, law enforcement, and psychological approaches to trauma. Heavy checkmark Jimmy's security firm had global contracts, teaching organizations to protect themselves while fostering resilience. Heavy checkmark Diego's youth centers had become national models of rehabilitation, proving redemption is possible. Heavy checkmark Sophie's nonprofit was reshaping family crisis response on a national scale. As their friends departed, Jimmy and Logan stood in the front yard. The same spot where their ordeal had begun a decade ago. The house behind them stood as a testament to resilience, its walls now holding stories of healing rather than harm. "We did good, didn't we?" Logan asked. Jimmy smirked, remembering Captain Hayes' words from years before. "We're still doing good," he corrected. "That's the real victory." Final image, a legacy of hope. The last image shows them all gathered at the newly designed training center. Each person contributing their unique strengths to a shared mission. Heavy checkmark Jimmy and Logan training survivors. Heavy checkmark Claire leading family restoration programs. Heavy checkmark Sophie coordinating justice initiatives. Heavy checkmark Marcus developing community outreach. Heavy checkmark Diego mentoring at-risk youth. Their legacy lived on. Not in violence or vengeance, but in the endless possibility of redemption and renewal. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen and I will see you there.